Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Al24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. Kiev survives another night and Russian troops suffer heavy losses as they fail to break Ukrainian capital's defenses despite city being caught bombed as negotiators prepare to meet on Belarus border for talks. While millions of Ukrainians flee their country, Vladimir Putin has ordered Russia's military to put its deterrence forces, while include nuclear weapons, on special alert because of the aggression statements and sanctions by the West, as he claimed. Thousands of people march in support of Ukraine in European cities, including Berlin, Madrid, Amsterdam and Stockholm, as this country continues to battle the Russian attacks every night. And we start our bulletin with the latest updates on the battleground. Russia's military operations on Ukraine has reached the 5th day as Western powers rolled out sweeping economic sanctions on Moscow. European allies have agreed to boost their support for Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky's government by funding and supplying it with weapons. Russia's president has escalated tensions by putting his nuclear forces on high alert by indicating he would give diplomacy a chance. Talks are set to begin Ukraine's border with Belarus. Ukraine's Interior Ministry says that at least 352 civilians have been killed in the conflict so far. Cities across Ukraine remain on high alert on the 5th day of the country's fighting against Russian attacks. Ukraine's military said that Russian troops had made repeated attempts to storm the outskirts of the capital Kiev, but had failed to capture it. Officials described Sunday's fighting as difficult, and Russian troops continued shelling from almost all directions. The major cities of Kharkiv and Chernobyl were also targeted overnight, although Kiev remained under Ukrainian forces control, but Russia made some progress in the south, taking the port town of Berdyansk. Fighting also continues in the strategic important port city of Mariupol in the south on the Sea of Azov near Russia-annexed Crimea. Russia's invasion of Ukraine will be the subject of an urgent debate at the Human Rights Council, where Kiev, supported by the broad coalition of countries, wants to call for an investigation into Moscow's human rights violation. In the urgent debate, Ukraine and its supporters hope to pass a resolution condemning the invasion and calling for the creation of a UN mechanism to investigate alleged human rights violations by Russian President Vladimir Putin's troops.
The military attack on Ukraine is putting at risk countless lives. Between Thursday morning and last night, our office has recorded 406 civilian casualties, including 102 killed, including 7 children, and 304 injured. Most of these civilians were killed by explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including shelling from heavy artillery and multi-launch rocket systems and airstrikes. The real figures are, I fear, considerably higher.
The escalation of military operations by the Russian Federation in Ukraine is leading to escalating human rights violations. We know the inevitable result of war: civilian casualties, women, children and men forced from their homes, hunger, poverty and huge economic disruption. Conflict is the utter negation of human rights across the board. Freedom of expression is under attack, with reports of journalists and activists arrested. I have consistently called for the end of the offensive and the return to the paths of dialogue and diplomacy.
Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that he will put the Russian army's deterrent force on alert, which may include a nuclear component. Putin ordered his defense minister and the chief of staff to put the Russian army's deterrent forces on a special combat alert regime in a meeting broadcast on the television.
Приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба
I order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff to put the Russian army deterrent forces on a special combat alert.
Уважаемые коллеги, вы видите,
You see that the Western countries are not only hostile to our country in the economic sphere, I mean, legitimate sanctions.
я имею в виду нелегитимные санкции, которые высшие должностные лица, ведущих
Senior officials from major NATO countries also allow aggressive statements against our country.
нашей страны. Поэтому
Despite the nuclear deterrence enlarged by the Kremlin, Russia and Ukraine agreed to hold diplomatic talks in the Belarusian region of Gomel. Hussein Burkan, what follow?
Moscow and Kiev agreed to hold a meeting in the Ukraine-Belarus border area, the first talks between the two sides since the start of the Russian military operation in Ukraine, while continuing Western efforts to impose painful sanctions against Moscow and its economy. Vladimir Medinsky, head of the Russian delegation, stressed that Russia is ready to negotiate peace at any time.
Время приезда. Мы прибыли сюда вчера вечером.
We're waiting for the arrival of the Ukrainian delegation. We arrived last night in the location that we agreed with Ukraine, near the Ukrainian border. We have not slept yet. Unfortunately, they had very complicated logistics, so they are postponing their arrival time.
Вот только сейчас.
In turn, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Kiev will have these talks, but expect no outcome.
Скажу відверто, як завжди, я не дуже...
I see things as always. Frankly, I don't believe in outcome of these talks. But we have to try, so that no Ukrainian citizens doubt that I, as a president, didn't try to stop the war when there was a slim chance.
не намагався зупинити війну.
These talks come despite the decision of Vladimir Putin to put the Russian army's deterrence force on alert, which may include a nuclear component.
приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба
I order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff to put the Russian army deterrent forces on a special combat alert.
It's noteworthy that the West imposed the most severe economic sanctions on Russia, the most important of which was excluding some Russian banks from the SWIFT system.
And to have more clarification over the latest in Ukraine and precisely over the expected meeting, I'm joined live by Mr. Ruslan Bortnik, who is the director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics from Kiev. Mr. Ruslan, what can we expect from these talks given the widespread skepticism about this resolution?
I would hope there's some kind of peacemaking process which lead us to the pause in the on the battlefields, on heavy clashes which are going around me now. Maybe for temporary pause in these clashes, for gathering the bodies of killed people, for changing the captured people. I hope for such result. Of course, we should understand this first negotiation. They are not such. They are not clear negotiations. Both sides try to stand up and some likes and ultimatums to each other, and no project, no draft of peace is between them on the table.
Mr. Ruslan, based on the statistics given, there are reports that the Russian troops, or let me say the Russian military, they are taking control over some cities in the southeast of Ukraine. What can you say about that?
The first thing which is dying on the war is truth. Truth is the first victim of the war. We should understand this. And I don't believe in any statistic from the both sides of conflict. For nowadays, I think both sides and Russia, of course, use this information to move their propaganda, to move their attempt to this situation. We should, to be honest, we should say that Russian troops have advantages on the south of Ukraine. small advantage on the east, and they made a great dangers near the Kiev from the north of Ukraine. At the same time, of course, they lose a lot of soldiers, a lot of equipment, and the Ukrainian soldiers are very brave and still continue to fight. No disorganization, no panic on the streets, on the fields, as they see.
Mr. Ruslan, taking into consideration what happened last night by the Russian President Vladimir Putin, what he said that there is nuclear war, there is nuclear weapons. Do you think that threatening with using these nuclear weapons, can we see a solution, or this is just another threat?
Oh, it's very difficult question. As I think Mr. Putin said about nuclear weapon, to make a scary Western countries, United States and Western Europe, which are helping nowadays Ukraine a lot with the ammunition, with the finance. Russia tries to push Western partners of Ukraine. Also, Russia is also scary because the best Russian troops are around Ukraine or in Ukraine, and the Russian borders is quite weak for nowadays. And Russia talking about the nuclear war weapon gives the signal to Western partners, to United States, that Russia should defend themselves. But even talking from this position, we should understand that there is a little possibility of using nuclear weapon in this war from the Russian side or on different sides.
Mr. Ruslan, as a last point, do you think this talking that is going to take place in Belarus will give us an end to this crisis, to this war, to this conflict?
Unfortunately, no. But this is a very important first step to demilitarization of conflict, to humanization of conflict, to changing the bodies of killed people and to changing the captured people. I hope so. But for my side, nowadays, no one side is going to change his position to the peace.
Thank you so much, Mr. Portland, joined live from Kiev. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, protests erupted in Russia and around the globe on February 26, with thousands taking to the streets in support of Ukraine, which is facing the fifth day of all military action on Russian forces. Thousands of protesters have been arrested by Russian police forces in different cities of the country.
From Moscow to Siberia, Russian anti-war activists took to the streets again to protest Russia's military action on Ukraine, despite the arrests of hundreds of protesters each day by police. Demonstrators held pickets and marched in city centers, chanting "No to war" as President Vladimir Putin ordered Russian nuclear deterrent to be put on high alert, upping the ante in the Kremlin's standoff with the West and stoking fears of a nuclear war. Police in Russia have arrested more than 2,000 anti-war protesters across the country on the fourth day of President Vladimir Putin's military action on Ukraine. This brought the tally of protesters arrested since Putin launched the military action in the early hours of Thursday to 5,250. In Moscow, riot police often outnumbered protesters, some of whom carried handwritten placards with peace signs and anti-war slogans in Russian and Ukrainian. Some wore masks with the word "enough" emblazoned in the front. Protests against the military action started Thursday in Russia and have continued daily ever since, even as Russian police have moved swiftly to crack down the rallies and detain protesters. The Kremlin has sought to downplay the protests, insisting that a much broader share of Russians support the assault on Ukraine. Ordinary Russians fear that stiff sanctions will deliver a crippling blow to the country's economy. Since Thursday, Russians have been flocking to banks and ATMs to withdraw cash, creating long lines and reported on social media about ATM machines running out of bills.
In similar note, Russian forces seized two small cities in the southeastern Ukraine and the area around the nuclear power plant, the Interfax news agency said on Monday, but ran into stiff resistance elsewhere as Moscow's diplomatic and economic isolation deepened. After 4 days of fighting and Russian advance that has gone more slowly than some expected, a Ukrainian delegation arrived at the border with Russian ally Belarus for ceasefire talks with Russian representatives. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko is threatening to ask for nuclear weapons to be sent from Russia after voters are said to have approved a change in the constitution ending the country's non-nuclear status. Lukashenko says he will take the step if the West transfers nuclear weapons to Poland or Lithuania. The law change means nuclear weapons will be on Belarusian soil for the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union. The EU is preparing to give Ukrainians special permission to live in the bloc for up to 3 years without the need to apply for asylum. Many are heading to Poland. Miriam Zian has more to clarify this situation.
On Sunday afternoon, at a meeting in Brussels, the EU interior ministers were trying to forge a common response to the ongoing refugee crisis. The ministers were asked to evaluate several proposals on humanitarian aid, migration and crisis management, and suggested the evaluation of the implementation of an adapted temporary protection device. The European Commissioner said she supported the adoption of the directive.
I'm really impressed of the strong solidarity that EU citizens are showing towards the Ukrainians coming. So far, very few have applied for asylum or international protection.
Asked if he supported triggering the 2001 Temporary Protection Directive, Sweden's Minister for Integration noted that it was not a magic wand.
And there's been certain countries that have been reluctant to be a part of the migration pact, and there are certain countries that have been reluctant to have a solidarity mechanism within the EU. And I think that this situation points out the importance of such a mechanism and such a pact.
It is worth mentioning that since the military operation, more than hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians fled their country. As reported by the United Nations, at least 368,000 citizens arrived in neighboring countries with long queues at Ukraine's borders with Romania, Slovakia and Moldova, with the majority escaping to Poland. All EU countries are called upon to respond to the best of their abilities to requests for assistance from the Ukrainian authorities. The number of Ukrainians fleeing is expected to extend and is believed it will reach millions. However, the movement of the people will most likely affect European countries in many areas, even if they have opened their arms for them.
As the Russian invasion continues, Ukrainians from all walks of life are mobilizing to support the war effort. In Dnipro, Ukraine's third largest city, an army of volunteers and humanitarian aid are working tirelessly to try to thwart the advancing Russian troops. Sofian Kenturi.
Aid organizations on the ground are making similar warnings as Russia continues to shell cities and villages throughout Ukraine. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announces €40 million of further humanitarian aid to Ukraine. The funding will help aid agencies respond to the deteriorating humanitarian situation, helping and creating a lifeline for Ukrainians with access to basic necessities and medical supplies such as medicines, serums, dresses and wound care packs. UK government humanitarian experts have also deployed to the regions to support those fleeing the violence in Ukraine. From the other side of the world, Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced Sunday the US will send nearly $45 million in humanitarian aid to Ukraine to help those affected by the Russia's military operation in Ukraine. The Turkish Red Crescent also launched a humanitarian relief operation. The Red Crescent is sending blankets, tents, sleeping bags, cleaning and hygiene materials, as well as 5 specialists, 1 mobile kitchen and 1 disaster response vehicle.
The sanctions by the US and its allies that targeted Russia's financial system made ruble fall by more than 30% against the dollar. The fall of the Russian currency will likely worsen inflation in Russia, and the Russian central bank said it will support the Russian financial institution that had been hit by the Western sanctions. These developments with the Russian economy comes after EU foreign ministers have imposed further measures against Moscow earlier, and in an unprecedented move, the EU agreed to supply weapons to Ukraine. Nabil Khazini has more to clarify the situation.
European Union leaders have agreed to a further package of individual and economic restrictive measures against Russia. This follows the first sanctions that would hit 5 areas: finance, energy, transport, export controls, and visa policy. The European Union will also ban Russian state media outlets broadcasting in the bloc.
In another unprecedented step, we will ban in the European Union the Kremlin's media machine. The state-owned Russia Today and Sputnik, as well as their subsidiaries, will no longer be able to spread their lies to justify Putin's war and to sow division in our union.
Aid to the Ukrainian military was also on the list of agreements. Some 500 million euros in arms and other aid will be provided to the Ukrainian military, a first time for the EU, as the bloc's treaties bar it from using its normal budget to fund operations with military or defense implications.
We have decided to use our capacities to provide lethal assistance to the Ukrainian army by a value of 450 million of support package and 50 more millions for the non-lethal supplies.
More financial sanctions will be imposed on Russia, such as removing the selected Russian banks from the SWIFT international payment system. Sanctions will also be strengthened against Belarus and the country's leader, a close Russian ally, Alexander Lukashenko. The EU will impose a ban on imports of products from mineral fuels to tobacco, wood and timber, cement, iron and steel on Belarus.
Thousands of people marched protesting in various Italian cities to join the response condemnation and urge an end to military operation in Ukraine. Crowds walked together bearing banners and messages of support for Ukraine to the Coliseum, one of the Italian capital's major landmarks. Thousands more gathered to rally in Milan, with protesters calling on the international government to put an end to Putin's action, while others showed their solidarity for Ukraine by waving the country's flag outside the northern city cathedral. On the other side, 150,000 people came together on Dam Square in Amsterdam to show their support for the people of Ukraine and protest the war, many of whom were from either Russia or Ukraine, demanding Russian President Vladimir Putin to withdraw his forces. Also, several thousands people, many decked out in the colors of the Ukrainian flag, gathered in Palace Saint-Michel in the heart of Paris at the call of Union of Ukrainians in France to support Ukraine and denounce the invasion of country by Russian forces. European Union has closed its airspace to all Russian aircraft, including private jets. More than a dozen countries in the EU had already banned Russian airlines like Aeroflot. Since Russia moves retaliation, Russia has banned flights from several European countries. FIFA, on the other hand, is the largest sporting organization to take action against Russia banning the country's flag and the anthem from international matches. Teams are compete under the title Football Union of Russia. No international matches will be played in the country. Many FIFA members associations are disappointed, though, that the sanction didn't go further. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder for our main stories. Kiev survives another night and Russian troops suffer heavy losses as they fail to break Ukrainian capital's defenses despite city being carpet bombed, as negotiators prepare to meet on Belarus border for talks. While millions of Ukrainians flee the country, Vladimir Putin has ordered Russia's military to put its deterrence forces while include weapons on special alert because of the aggression statements and sanctions by the West, as he claimed. Thousands of people marched in support of Ukraine in European cities, including Berlin, Madrid, Amsterdam, and Stockholm, as the country continued to battle the Russian attacks every night. That's all the news we have got for now, so see you later on for a better information. Have a blessed evening.